Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a redux on the street car stick shift drag strip launch preload technique and some launch techniques. The original I did on this was too long, covered a lot of extra material. This one's going to be simply focused on the burnout, staging, the launch, and getting down the track. So what is the preload method? Essentially, you're using the emergency brake as a staging device to allow you to place some preload in the driveline by dragging the clutch a little bit. And why would you want preload? There's really two reasons. You're going to limit your breakage and you're going to improve consistency. Breakage is typically the result of high dynamic shock loads. These occur when parts have slack between them, and they're allowed to collide with one another. The force imparted on a driveline component when it's allowed to gain some momentum before it acts on the next component increases dramatically when there's lash. Preload's a way that we can get rid of that. It's like the difference between throwing a baseball versus hitting a baseball with a bat. The momentum of hitting with the bat generates far more energy. When you release the clutch sharply without any preload in the driveline, you allow every gear tooth, every spline, every drive shaft bolt, every coupler, every suspension bushing to all get a running start at the next piece. That's a really good way to tear up parts. So the preload aims to take all the slack out of the driveline and reduce those shock loads when you turn the clutch loose. And then the second benefit is consistency. Unless you're running a clutch stop, which is also a great tool for a stick shift car, you likely have a decent amount of travel between the clutch pedal being fully depressed and then where engagement actually begins as you begin to release the pedal. If you don't do anything to hold the car still in the beams, there's no way to get to the edge of the engagement zone so you're ready to start a controlled clutch release when it's time to launch. At best, you're going to roll out of the beams prematurely, or you're going to be staged very deep as you try to feel for that friction zone. And it's definitely going to cut into reaction time. Or what I see a lot of folks do is they just dump the clutch. And that's definitely not the best way to get good results with drag radials. You're likely going to shock the tire and then have to get out of the throttle to get the tire hooked back up, or the car is just going to bog. You can shock a bias ply and use a little wheel speed on the hit, but ultimately you're still really punishing the driveline. Briefly, I'll talk about the burnout. I like to roll through the water and try to spin the tires over so they're fully covered in water, and then roll to the edge of the water box before I start the burnout so that I'm not flinging water up into the wheel wells where it can drip back down on the tire as I'm staging. I will usually do a second gear burnout for about 3 to 5 seconds. Basically, as soon as I can see any smoke in my mirrors, the tire is typically hot enough, whether it's a radial or a bias ply. If it's a hard street tire, I probably just want 1 to 2 seconds to scuff the tire. If you're getting smoke, a street tire is getting gummy and slimy, and it's not getting any stickier. I don't use a line lock. I can usually just 2-foot the car, but it does make it a lot easier with a line lock. So after the burnout, I'll roll up till I light the top pre-stage bulb, and then I stop the car normally with the foot brake. I make sure I'm in first gear, traction control's off, 2 steps ready to go, and then I'll grab a firm handful of emergency brake, but I keep my thumb depressed on the brake release. I'm not looking to set the brake, but rather be able to control pressure on it as a staging tool. When I'm ready to go fully staged, I will start to ease the clutch out until I can just barely feel it dragging. You can hear it in the motor as well when it's just starting to engage a tiny bit. You don't need much, you're just adding a light preload. Once I feel good about the preload amount, I start to ease the emergency brake off until the car starts to just creep ahead. If you got the preload nice and light, you'll need to almost completely release the brake to get the car to roll, and that's where you want to be. As soon as I light the second full stage bulb, I firmly yank the e-brake back on, careful not to change my preload. My car comes up on the 2-step basically instantly, and so I usually wait until the tree starts to drop if I'm just time trialing and not working on a reaction time. If I'm racing heads up, I'll go on the 2-step as soon as both myself and my competitor are fully staged. And then when it's time to launch, I drop the e-brake as I make my clutch release. There's essentially two different type of clutch release styles, mostly based on the tire that you run. A fast, quick release is used with a bias ply slick, which is designed to have wheel speed at launch. And then a slow, deliberate release is used with a drag radial, which does not like or tolerate wheel speed. In either case, the goal is to keep the engine RPM up near peak torque, where it's going to deliver the most power to the tires. Typically, you'll probably have a launch RPM trace that starts out high, above peak torque, and then pulls down towards that peak torque, maybe dipping below it slightly, where the tires or the clutch fully hook up, and then it's going to rise normally once you're past that point of fully engaged and fully hooked. You know, a power adder car may have more torque than the tires can handle, so the launch RPM may get dialed down accordingly. But in order to have the car bog, you're going to expect to still need to launch with some clutch slip or tire spin for optimal 60-foot times. The quick release with a bias ply is a pretty simple technique. Once you're preloaded, you want to make a fast but deliberate release and let the tires do the spinning and slipping. You're not looking to violently dump the clutch, but you are expecting to exceed the limits of the tire's traction, and they're going to let the RPM hang up where it needs to be until the vehicle speed rises to match the wheel speed and everything hooks up. That should happen within the 60-foot, within the first 1 to 1.5 seconds of the run. If it's spinning further than that, you need to back the launch RPM down. If you're having trouble with the engine bogging, you need more launch RPM. The drag radial launch is much more challenging, as you're going to slip the clutch rather than the tire to keep the engine RPM up until the vehicle speed comes up to match it. The type of clutch you have will determine how easy or difficult it is to keep the engine in the optimal RPM, but your goal is to release the clutch over a 0.5 to 1 second interval, keeping the tires hooked as the engine RPM stays up and you bring the vehicle speed to match that. OEM clutches that are marginal on their overall power holding capacity tend to be really good for this, as the closer the clutch's rated power handling is to the actual power, the easier they are to slip on the launch. A clutch that has far more holding power than the vehicle actually makes for power will tend to engage more sharply and be more difficult to modulate. There are clutch release devices such as the clutch tamer, the Hitmaster, that can be set up to modulate the clutch release for you. These can be great tools for achieving the maximum potential from a stick shift car. Outside of the tools like that, it's really up to the driver to practice and refine what works best for their vehicle combination. The preload is an often overlooked and important piece of that puzzle to improve consistency and cut down on parts breakage. Once you've got the launch down, the rest of the pass is pretty simple. I prioritize clean, consistent shifts at the correct shift point over outright shift speed. Ultimately, the shift speed improves with practice, and while it is important to the ET and the trap speed, consistent shifts are even more important. I don't usually get as many passes as I'd like at the track, so I want to make sure everyone counts. Nothing sucks more than logging a personal best in the 60-foot and then missing a gear. Hope that gives you some things to think about for your next track outing. I love the challenge of stick shift drag racing. I'd love to hear about it in the comments, so post up. Thanks for stopping by.